us up to date on where Sam is today.
Well, Sam is luckily still with us. He is suffering from pancreatic cancer as we speak. He's going through chemo. He's doing okay. He was just in the hospital this week for 4 days because of an infection. But I spoke to him today, and he's hanging in there. And he's very excited that this was happening today. And he wanted to send his love to all of you that came to see this film.
Can you tell us the story about how you first met Sam Leach?
Well, it goes back to the early 1980s. Me and Tony were in a group in Long Island, New York, called the Kids, K-I-D-D-S. You had to spell it different than, the way the Beatles spelled Beatles different. Yeah, we had to be like that. So, after Lennon was killed, Sam started doing interviews, and I started hearing his name on radio interviews, television. So we went to Liverpool to set up a tour, because that's what Long Island bands did back in that day, but they would go to England to set up a tour. And I sought Sam out, and had a funny thing, we had a dinner with him, and as he's eating his dinner, I want to throw this little story in because everybody gets a kick out of it. We meet, we sit down, Sam gets his soup, and his eyeglass pops out of his glass into his soup. He never acknowledges it.
No.
And he's eating his soup until the glass comes up on the spoon. And he takes it, shakes it off, and puts it back in it. And he's in his soup. And I'm saying to myself, this guy is quite a character. And so I fell in love with him that night. And I maintained a very close relationship with him since then. He became our manager. We asked him to come back to New York. He saw us, he loved us, he did what he could from a long-distance love affair, basically. And we moved on, but we always stayed in contact because he was just such a wonderful man.
Let me take some questions from the audience. If you raise your hand, I'll call on you. I've got a bright light in front of me, so the guy waving with his cell phone.
George Martin, he just shows up. There wasn't any introduction to his arrival. Was it tough finding people that could contribute part of that story?
So the question was about George Martin, and was it tough finding people who contribute part of that story?
Well, the period of the film where George Martin comes in is sort of like where, our story with Sam kind of ends. So we didn't really get too much into the story. Everybody's heard the Beatles' Ed Sullivan story forward, pretty much, which you'll hear about a lot with the new film coming out, on Hulu. But so we kind of wanted to rewind the clock a little bit. So we didn't have many witnesses to like studio sessions and things like that. So, but you're right. It's difficult just doing this film completely because we really wanted to set out and make sure that we didn't get third or fourth-hand information on it. We wanted to primarily our film has everybody that was actually in one of the bands or kind of was there, so which we felt was the most accurate account of stuff. So I can't really speak too much on George Martin's involvement in there. We got Pete and a little bit of Mona Best's story, but we didn't want to kind of hypothesize on too much what happened there.
I mean, one of the things that was so fascinating to me about this is understanding the context of Liverpool at that time and seeing all those other bands that did go on to achieve such fame. Can you talk to me about what it was like gathering all those other musicians to do interviews?
Well, first on that note about Liverpool, you wonder why Liverpool? Why was that sort of a mecca for this stuff happening? And you got to realize World War II was ending, the war was going on, but Liverpool was a port city, so they were in a strategic position where soldiers and stuff were coming over from America, and they were bringing a lot of records from the States. So there wasn't radio or internet then, so these bands, these guys, these kids that were disillusioned and unemployment was high, grabbed the guitar and stuff and started starting bands. So then they were able to get these records firsthand from the States. So they were doing covers, and if you know anything about that history, these bands, for the most part, they weren't writing songs, they were playing cover music. So they were covering these records. So that sort of gave them a sound. But they were covering these records that were done primarily by studio musicians, but they were not accomplished musicians themselves. So they were using toy guitars, Sears-type guitars. So they were doing renditions of that, but really didn't play very well. So that's what became sort of this Mersey beat sound, which was a simplistic sort of version of the cover songs that they were doing from the States. okay. And then, of course, as bands got signed, and certainly the Beatles, they started writing their own music and stuff. So that period is pretty interesting. And then, again, when we went over there with Sam, we wanted to make sure that we were able to find the groups, because we wanted to find the real story, because we're doing a movie on the promoters. So the best way to do a movie on the promoters is to find out, what bands were promoted by them and their experiences in, playing for those guys. So we felt that that's what we wanted to highlight. This film is kind of a thank you to those guys, those people that really don't get the everyday praise that sort of the Epstein and Sullivan story forward gets. So, I don't know if that helps a little bit.
Let's take another question. I see one way up in the corner there.
I was wondering why you either chose not to or were unable to license Beatles music for the documentary.
The question was about the Beatles music and licensing it.
Okay, so we were waiting for this one. Ultimately, obviously when we put the film together and came together with the first assembly, we had a huge soundtrack of not only the Beatles music, but other Mersey beat groups of that time. And because naturally, that's what you want to include in it. You see the Beatles, you want to hear them. So, we finished our first assembly, and then it's time to go for our licensing and stuff. So, of course, we had a music supervisor. We went, we sought out our licensing, we paid him our money, and he puts out the requests. And of course, the Beatles didn't give us any licenses. And then the next step is sort of, maybe we can use bits and have another group recreate it. So that's a sync license. So we put in, Sony owns the rights for that. So we kind of put into Sony, and we sort of, didn't get any Sony cooperation with giving us any licenses for that. So, and then several of the other songs that we had were also sort of in their catalog. So we didn't have much success, I would say, at licensing any of that stuff. So in the end, we tried to emulate the sound a little bit with a score from a music house and stuff. But we're excited about moving forward and maybe re-including some of this stuff, with whatever we have to do to kind of get that happening.
It's a process.
It's a process, and we did everything we needed to do legally to make sure we're doing the right thing. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge to show a Beatles movie and not really have Beatles music.
Right here, gentlemen.
The record companies? Oh, the Beatles? No. Sam occasionally will have a run-in with Paul in England, but. We had Sam, because Sam's the closest to Paul. We had Sam ask if he would participate in the documentary and be in a film about him, and that didn't go so well.
Question on the aisle there.
What was Mark Lewis's problem with the narrative, and how do you plan on dealing with having to take him out of the film?
So the question was, what was Mark Lewison's problem with the narrative? There was the disclaimer at the beginning of the film.
Well, Mark, we had an hour and a half interview with him, and it went great. We found out a lot of information, and it's been, I'd say, 2 years that we had a release for him to sign, and he took it with him, and that's not uncommon in a documentary. That's the challenging part about a documentary is to interview people and kind of have them sign a release. It's just the reality of it. So, but he never said he wasn't going to. And anyway, fast forward, we showed him the film, and he had his opinion of it, and didn't like some of it, I guess. But he agreed to having us screen the film, and with the disclaimer. But I think we don't really know specifically what his issues were. We do know that in the past he's been employed by Apple to write some books and stuff. So I just don't know. I can't really comment on that. But he asked us to put this disclaimer because he disagrees with some of the stuff. And again, that's an evolving.
Did you just get like a Terry Gilliam style version of his head, or whenever something he's offended by comes up?
Yeah.
Have this little hand go Paulus?
Do you work for that company? Because I ordered 6 of those. No. We really don't know what's happening there. And again, we have a dialogue with Mark, and he has worked for we have neutral people. He's a neutral historian from what he says, but if you work for the Beatles, you obviously have sort of a legacy there to sort of I don't know, to protect.
We might also put in perspective that you guys have been working on the film throughout the summer. You kind of put the wraps on this like days ago.
Yeah, and getting back to the music situation, and it's a wonderful story with this film because literally a month and a half, maybe end of June, is when we met our submarine folks who fell in love with the movie and thankfully, took us on to represent it. But we were literally just out of a first assembly of a long piece of movie, and suddenly, suddenly, we had to finish the film. So we had to kind of move things, and then Submarine said, well, let's try and go into Toronto Film Festival. So we put it in there, not really expecting much, but because we were just finishing the editing. So they sent us an email, great news, all this kind of stuff, and we're like, great. And then we're like, we're not even close to being finished. So we have a month and a half to finish it. Literally a few days later, we get emails from TIFF saying, this is due, this is due, this is due. And we're like, oh no, like we can't just deliver it on September.
I like a film that stirs the pot a little
Yeah,
bit.
so then it fast forwarded all this licensing issues and releases and unfinished things, and we literally, I just delivered the disclaimer yesterday to put up, tested it before we screened. We finished our music mix. I can't even, if you have another hour. We can...
All right, let's get into a couple more quick questions. There's a woman here waving her hand.
Oh, yeah.
You're next.
Man, that is true.
We'll get you first,
That is
then I'll go to you, because she's had her hand up the whole time. Let's hear it.
I'm the right age to remember the birth of the Beatles.
And the right accent.
And you can tell from my accent I come from England. And I remember the Mersey Sound. I was a student then, and it was great to dance to. And I'm glad you made this film, because it does fill in some of the gaps in their past history. And it needs tidying up, certainly.
I agree.
And the pictures were all too neat and tidy. And I've seen better pictures of Epstein when he was getting his hands dirty. I think you did well to make the film, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'll go to this one in the middle.
I was just curious, after all the interviews and research that you've done, what's your theory on why the past was removed?
So the question was, do you have your own version of a theory on why Pete Best was moved out of the band?
I think we have to follow what the people that were actually very close to them are saying. And his mother being quite the meddler in the Beatles business, and Brian being a very controlling person, didn't like that. My first guess would be, and after talking, and we have many more interviews than what you've seen here, there are much more, a lot of reasons, but I really think it came down to originally Mona Best being a little bit too meddling, and if she was going to continue to be intrusive, the way Sam was also intrusive after Brian took over, where there was actually times when the Beatles went against Brian and with Sam on certain issues that were coming up, and it drove Brian crazy. So that made Brian want to get rid of Mrs. Best and Pete and Sam Leach. Alan wasn't a threat. He was probably too drunk to be a threat to anyone. So, and I'm going to let Tony also add to this.
I have a little bit of a different theory because I can really relate to the Pete thing a little bit. So, as you remember, John and I were in a band together. I was the drummer. John was one of the two frontmen, John and Jimmy. And I was a lot cuter than those guys. And they didn't like it very much. So, the girls would come around the stage, kind of hang out by me, and they eventually got rid of me, the kids. So, my theory is Pete was so good looking that the Beatles didn't want the attention taken away from him. So, like, those are the myths. I can relate to one of them. I didn't always look like this. All right, John.
We'll take one more question, then we can continue the conversation out in the hallway. We want to go to an area of the room that I haven't been in yet, but all right, let's take this gentleman right here.
What is Pete Best, what is he doing now, you know?
What is Pete Best doing now?
Well, Pete has the Pete Best Band. They play at the Casbah still on a regular basis. Pete does touring. He does a lot of appearances, a lot of the Beatle Fest type of things, and chiller autograph sessions. Pete's around, and Pete's a really nice guy. He's managed by his younger brother, Rogue. Yeah, they really are real nice guys. They were very cooperative, very forthcoming, and I wish Pete all the best. I mean, because he went through, I mean, there's even stories that he tried to commit suicide after the Beatles let him go. So, but he made it through. He's a tough guy, he's a great guy, and I wish them all the best.
Well, you're the first audience in the world to see this film. I hope you will take to social media and let people know about it. Hope you get to see a lot more documentaries in the next 10 days. Thank you very much for coming. Thanks especially to John Rose and Tony Guma.